On February 9th of 2004, 21-year-old UMass student Maura Murray drove from her dorm in Amherst, Massachusetts to the White Mountains of New Hampshire.
At approximately 7:27 p.m., Maura spun out her 1996 Saturn on a hairpin turn on Route 112 in North Haverhill. There has never been a credible sighting of Maura since.
Maura is 5 foot 7 inches tall. She weighs 120 pounds, and she has brown hair and hazel eyes.
If you have any information regarding Maura's disappearance, please submit it to us,
The Murray family at MauraMurrayFamilyDirect@gmail.com.
or the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit.
This is Missing Maura Murray. Welcome back to Missing Maura Murray. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I couldn't be better, Tim, as a matter of fact. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And Lance, in this episode, we speak to an author named Michael Lister, really interesting guy who's doing some cool stuff. And this episode, we don't really talk about the details of Maura Murray's disappearance like we have been doing recently.
Yeah, we kind of lighten it up a little bit with this episode. Michael Lister's name popped up because he is doing this campaign, which is called Solve a True Crime Mystery with Michael Lister. He's an author of approximately 37,000 books. I'm obviously kidding about that, but he is a prolific writer. And Michael Lister is the New York Times bestselling and award-winning novelist. He is a Floridian, and he's known for his acclaimed John Jordan Blood mystery thriller series. He's written a series of books about a character named John Jordan, and he'll describe John Jordan in the interview. But what he's doing right now is something that's a little bit more interactive. It's called Solve a True Crime Mystery with Michael Lister. And he's inviting his readers and he's inviting the audience to contribute to the plot line of a new book and solve the mystery. And he takes his plot lines from crimes that have happened in the real world and he fictionalizes them. And he's a big follower of Maura Murray's case as well as Brianna Maitland's case. And he even has a book where he features characters that are sort of based on you and I, Tim.
Yeah, well, he has this book called Cold Blood, and these are fictionalized. So they're really, he takes a little bit of the premise, and in the case of Cold Blood, a little bit of the premise of Maura Murray's disappearance. And then, yeah, there are podcaster characters who he tells us in this interview were based on us.
Which is really humbling, and to think that he listened to the show and formulated a plot line around it and felt like what we said was important enough to be in his story. So I want to thank him again for that. It was very surprising to hear because when he said it to us, that was the first time that we knew that this was actually the case, that he had characters based on us. And he's doing a really good thing with the series of books. If you go to his website, michaellister.com, and scroll down just a little bit, you'll see a section that says True Crime Fiction. That book, Cold Blood, is featured in this collection, and a donation from every purchase will go directly to the Finding Maura Murray GoFundMe that Julie Murray started. So, again, go to michaellister.com, scroll down a little bit, the section True Crime Fiction, and know that if you buy from that section, you will be donating to the GoFundMe that Julie Murray started.
All right, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoy this interview with author Michael Lister. Make sure to check out his site and check out Solve a Crime with Michael Lister. welcome to the podcast, Michael Lister. How are you today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Been listening to you guys for a long time, and it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Awesome. It's so cool to have you on. You have literally written 52,000 books.
My first novel was published in 1997, and at that time I was still a full-time prison chaplain, and my main detective, John Jordan, is a prison chaplain as well as a cop. And I've been called prolific. I definitely, that's pretty much all I do. I've written full-time since 2000. So do have quite a few books so far, and a couple that have been inspired by you guys, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's super surreal to hear something like that, especially from someone who is a prolific writer like yourself that does it full time. It's really surreal and it's really humbling. And you, I just want to focus a little bit on your main character. You write primarily detective stories, and you have this continuing character. How many books is in his catalog? And tell us a little bit about him.
Okay, his name is John Jordan, and like I said, when the series opens, he is a full-time prison chaplain. He's an ex-cop from Atlanta who's come back to the Panhandle of Florida to try to put his life back together. And he worked the Atlanta child murders in Atlanta, and had a lot happen there. So he's coming back home, and for a while he's just a prison chaplain, but because of his past, he's continually gets pulled into investigations. Sometimes inside the prison, sometimes outside in the small Panhandle community where he lives. And then as the series goes on, he actually becomes a sheriff's investigator again. So once again, he's got a gun and a badge, and it's all about him solving crime, mysteries. He specializes in, the very difficult mysteries to solve, the whodunits, the sometimes locked room mysteries, sometimes just very baffling cases. But he also brings, I think, a unique perspective in terms of his compassion and his care for the victims. He takes a pastoral or ministerial approach as well as investigating. And so it's the ecclesiastical sleuth goes all the way back to G.K. Chesterton, who created Father Brown back in 1911. And there's been various incarnations, priests and nuns and rabbis, even imams that solve crime. Mine is the first prison chaplain, and mine is the first to really put a minister / detective in a hard-boiled detective novel.
Okay, wow. Interesting combination there. And so this character is fictional, though.
Yes. Obviously, based on a lot of my own experiences. One of the reasons I've been interested in crime fiction since college, and one of the reasons I took the job as the chaplain at this prison was because I was already writing and interested in doing a crime fiction series. And in crime fiction, especially, long running series are in some ways expected. And if you can give your protagonist an interesting job, in addition to being a detective, I think you are doing well. And so that's why I took the job as a prison chaplain. I got to live. Actually, the state of Florida paid me to do my research every single day. And so I did that for a decade full time. And then I made the transition to writing full time. And you had asked how many books I have. I'm actually working on the 25th John Jordan novel right now.
25th John Jordan novel. You must have an endless catalog of ideas written down somewhere. Do you scour like the internet and news for these ideas? Because I mean, 25 books on with the same character, you must always be taking notes. You must always be listening and watching things.
That's where you guys come in, because I was writing this series and I knew pretty early on I wanted it to be a long running series. I really am hoping to write it for my entire life, however long that happens to be. But with a long running series, obviously at a certain point, you're going to run out of ideas, and so I wrote for the first several books, I use my own experiences, and I'm influenced and inspired by not just my time as a chaplain and working with convicted felons for a decade, my time living in Atlanta and Florida, and how that the two are so different, my experiences with friends and family, and all my life experiences. And then, of course, there's literature itself and how you're inspired by the greats like Agatha Christie and others, and so constantly open to all of that. But at a certain point, I realized that if I'm going to keep the series fresh and I'm going to keep it relevant, that I wanted to bring about a couple of things. One was I wanted to introduce true crime in two different ways in the series. In one way, some of the John's cases are actually inspired by true crime. In other cases, he's actually working a true crime case. For instance, like The Innocent Blood is the sixth book in the series. And after the first 5 novels, Innocent Blood is a prequel. And in that prequel, we see John as a 12-year-old actually encountering the Atlanta child murderer when he was vacationing with his family in Atlanta. He was at the Omni Hotel. That's where a lot of the victims out of the arcade went missing. And anyway, so he had a confrontation and he just became obsessed with the case. And so as soon as he graduates high school, he moves to Atlanta to investigate that case. I have a few different connections to that case that, some serendipitous things that happened to me while I was in Atlanta. So that's an instance in where John actually is actually investigating a true crime case. And a lot of times I'll put a fictional case alongside the true crime. In another case, as in Cold Blood, which is the one you guys inspired, I take a true crime case and fictionalize it. So I research it like I was actually going to write a true crime book, about the case, but then I fictionalize every aspect of it. And so you can find certain parallels. And so my character, Randa Raffield, is very similar in a lot of ways to Maura Murray. But there's, of course, a lot of differences as well. And then my 2 characters that have a podcast and that are obsessed with Randa Raffield's disappearance and all that surrounds that were inspired by you guys. And in fact, while listening to one of your episodes, and I won't say which one because I don't want to give away my surprise ending. That's the other thing. I always try to make my endings, realistic and almost inevitable and yet surprising. I hope the reader is just like, wow, they didn't see it coming. But I was listening to you guys, and there was you'll probably know when I say this, but you guys apologized for a certain approach you had taken, and well, I'll say this much, that you wanted to bring in more of a female perspective. You think way back to that, and that just like, wow. And so that gave me my idea for where I was going with that novel. So that's how I keep the novel fresh, the series fresh. Each novel, I just wrote a book set during the pandemic, so I'm using real life, current events, true crime, literature, just open to everything I can be to continually, hopefully get good and fresh ideas.
Wow.
Well, that's very cool. Yeah, thank you. I mean, that is pretty much an honor hearing that that we're inspired characters in a book. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, all of the stories that you've written up prior to that, and again, yeah, it's very surreal to think that something that we said gave you a brand new plot line, which is, I'm getting a little emotional. But no, it's really cool. It's really cool.
I tell you, I'd like to mention another thing as it relates to using true crime. I try to be extremely respectful and very careful when it comes to using, the experiences of real people, and especially victims and their families. And so, when I explore topics, I try to do it with compassion and understanding. I try to avoid what we so often see online, which is victim blaming and, looking for a reason why someone became a victim, and as if it's their fault somehow. And of course, suspicion is almost always directed toward the family or close friends and loved ones. So I don't take it lightly when I use actual events and true crime cases. I try to do it with the utmost respect, and while I'm exploring theories and ideas, and in a way enjoying it and having fun with the investigation, and I'm writing a novel that's meant to be entertaining and page turning, but I never forget that there are real victims, and that includes family members and loved ones that are suffering that led to this inspiration. So I try to be very careful with that.
No, that makes a whole lot of sense, and that's an approach that I think Tim and I, put an emphasis on. It is really tough to navigate that, especially when you put yourself out there. You're a writer, and you're doing this, like you said, because you want to make sure that you have a page turner, but you still want to be respectful. It's a bit different in the podcast world because you do interact a lot more with
Sure.
those who are very passionate about the case, and it's almost a bit of collateral damage to have that focused on yourself. Sometimes it's
Right.
if you can take that away from them reaching out to the family or friends of the victim, if we're now the distraction for them and they're getting information, then I guess that's a good thing. Well, I'm almost positive that's a good thing. So yeah, but it is super important whenever you're doing this, that it's not for just entertainment purposes. There's an actual value behind writing a true crime book or having a true crime podcast.
I've got a collection, an actual box set of books the collection is called True Crime Fiction. And it's a collection of, I think, about 6 of the novels I've written so far that are actually based on true crime cases. And people who are familiar with true crime will be able to identify the cases almost immediately. There's a lot of readers that are not into true crime. They're just into fiction, crime fiction. And so they could very well read it and not even know it was based on a real case, or that elements of it are based on a real case. So in that collection, I actually write an introduction for each book and explain what about the case, what drew me to the case, what inspired me about it, and how I took it and made it fiction, how I turned it into hopefully a compelling page turner whodunit, and how I tried to do so, with the utmost respect for the families and the victims.
So I guess then, like, how close do you come to details of Maura Murray's case, for example?
There's a lot that is similar. Now, I took the inspiration from what happened to her and I moved it to North Florida. So it happens on this rural highway next to the coast, to the Gulf Coast. And she is Randa Rathfield, who goes missing. She vanishes in a very short period of time. She encountered a truck driver, shortly before she vanished. And by the time the first deputy arrived, it was like 7 minutes or so that she completely vanished. Her motivation for leaving her life and why she was going, where she was going and why she was doing it, is different than Maura, but there's a lot that's in common, and it allowed me to explore various things like that. And when Cold Blood opens, and this case John is investigating this case, it's a cold case. It's been cold for a while. So all of that is similar to Maura Murray's case. It's also the fact that there's this very popular podcast and people get obsessed about the case. And so I got the opportunity to deal with that, to look at, when it comes to true crime, I guess it's like most things in life. What we see often says more about us than it does what we're actually looking at. That's true of religion, which I have degrees in religion and studied for a long time. I think that's true of politics. I think that's true of life in general. And I really think it's true of true crime. And so people project onto either certain characters or certain situations, certain cases, so much that says more about them than it does the actual case. And so I tried to explore all of that, the explosion, the popularity of true crime, especially since Serial, since that sort of relaunched what I believe to be this sort of golden age of true crime, particularly with the advent of podcasting.
How did you first come across Moore's case? I'm assuming you were doing a bunch of research for an actual case that was fascinating and had the mystery element and had that cultural element.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to remember, and I do so much research. And think about, I think that was, I believe it was book number 12 or 13. So think about how many books I've written since then, and they're all involve a lot of research. But as far as I remember, because my books, my series are set in the Deep South, and because John Jordan's best friend, Merrill Monroe, is an African-American private investigator, correctional officer, I deal a lot with racial tensions, issues in my work. And I was really studying how popular certain cases become and how others do not. And I believe, and I can't remember the name of the article, but there was an article where someone was talking about, the writer was talking about how victims from minority communities, poor victims, don't get nearly the attention, the publicity that others do. And of course, JonBenét Ramsey was mentioned, another case that I've studied and really am obsessed with as well. Moore Murray, different ones. So I think that's what led me into her case, as best I recall.
I'm sorry, I started laughing there. I almost couldn't help myself. I really just, I want to read your book with us, with the characters that are based off us, and I just pictured myself reading it, being like, "This is the character." Like, well, what? Maybe this guy must think I'm an asshole. I can't wait to read it though.
That the two podcasters actually are series characters. So they're not just in Cold Blood. That's where they start their podcast. But they, one is a reporter or an ex-reporter, and had done some investigating himself. And, as newspapers are, more and more reporters are getting fired, finding it difficult to find a job, he turned to podcasting. And the friend of his that does it with him is also an investigator, but he's actually a former religion professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. And his foray into investigation was when cases had elements of religion, he was called in as a specialist. So if there was something that was ceremonial or different elements like that, it was often serial killer cases. But anyway, so the two of them come together for this podcast, and it's a running podcast, through the book that, is happening. And so a lot of the information about the case, the backstory and all, comes from the podcast itself. And then these characters continue throughout the series.
Well, you pretty much nailed our backstory.
I do. If you read the book or if you listen to it on audio, I would be interested to see. Yes, they are different from you guys, their backgrounds and all of that. But I hope that you see some inspiration from you guys with your back and forth and how you communicate with each other. I really took that as an inspiration, and I hope you see that in there.
That's awesome. I can't wait to check that out. Yeah.
I know. I can't wait to read it. And this connection that we've made now was so random. It was just I was just doing a search for true crime authors, and your name popped up a few times. I'll just do that periodically to see if we can get some on the show, because I think a lot of them have this ability to research and ability to tap into the community that's behind the true crime, the particular crime, like the Moore Murray community. And that's just something that Tim and I are exploring more and more, is the psychology behind it. So that was just the purpose of looking into it. I had no idea, and this is mostly, kind of for the listeners too. I had no idea. Tim and I had no idea that you had a book that had us as like characters in a sense. This is the first time we're hearing about it too.
Well, and it's interesting because when you reached out, and I'm doing this new project called Solve a Crime,
right?
Me. solve a mystery. And what I'm doing, to me, this is because of, so many people are still in quarantine and looking for things to do. And I just thought this would be a neat approach. Normally, I do all the research for the true crime case before I start writing the novel, and then I continue to research it as I'm writing it. And a lot of times I'll talk about after the novel's published, I'll talk to my readers and interviewers about the case. This time I'm actually reversing that. And so I'm inviting readers who want to do the research with me. I'm actually having a discussion group where we'll investigate this true crime case together. And then as I'm writing the book that comes out in October, and then they'll get to read the book and compare. First of all, we'll come up with theories and different things about the real life case, and we'll examine evidence and, all of those kind of things. And then they'll get to read what I did fictionally, what I did with the story, and be able to compare those. But so I think that's probably why my name came up, and why, especially connected to Maura Murray and different ones, because there was a newspaper article that came out, and I mentioned some of the cases that had inspired me already. And so when you reached out and I said, I would absolutely love to do your show. And it was actually probably the third or fourth email that I told you that you guys had inspired, the book to a large extent. And then you guys had inspired characters in it, because I wasn't even thinking of that at first, and then I got to thinking, man, I probably should have reached out to you guys at the time. I think the book came out in 2015 or 2016. I should have reached out and said, hey, I should have sent you a book, but I just I'm always on to the next book, and that I did, and I didn't do it for any other reason except I found it inspiring. I found you guys inspiring. But I probably should have told you a long time ago that was the case.
It's okay. We're very intimidating. It's okay. We understand.
No, that's
right.
Super cool, though. I can also see how the podcast element could be a great plot device in your series. So that makes a lot of sense fictionally there. But tell us a little bit about this this CrowdSolve event.
Yeah, this is just the title is Solve a Mystery with Michael Lister. That's the and there's I should say there's more information at my website, and that's just michaellister.com. But every time, if I finish a novel and I don't have the idea yet, the inspiration for the next novel, then I take a little time and just soak up things. I'm just constantly looking, and because I've been doing this for so long, I really have a trust that the next idea will come. Often it comes before I even finish the previous book. But in this case, when I finished my most recent book is called Blood Pathogen, and it's a murder mystery set during the pandemic. I didn't have the idea for the next one. I always have some ideas of things that I hope to get to eventually, but I didn't have the specific idea. And so I just began to stay open. And my wife and I watch a lot of true crime. We listen to a lot of true crime. And so I read a lot of true crime books. I'm constantly open. And I had a couple of things came up, and I was intrigued, and I'll dig a little deeper, and it's, that's not quite it, and I may actually circle back, and that may be a book, in the future, but I knew it wasn't for this time. And then I came upon a case that I was like, oh my goodness, the setup was so perfect for a crime fiction thriller. Murder mystery, and that's all of mine are whodunits. You don't, John is investigating. You're invited to investigate the mystery along with him, and it's not revealed until the end, who the culprit is. And so, when I came across this setup, I was like, "This is perfect. I'm going to do this." And that was one of those things that clicked, and I knew almost immediately, intuitively, hey, this is it. After that, then I began to try to find more information about it. And then I was just so thrilled to find there's a lot of information out there. And there's, some TV shows like the true crime TV shows, and there's actually a podcast. And so there's things about it. And I've not said what the case is so far. And I've said that I'm not going to reveal that until the group itself. But I can tell you it's a quote unquote solved case, because the authorities ruled it an accident. And I really think that it bears another look, and a lot of other people have already looked at it and find it very suspicious. And I think foul play is very likely involved. And so, anyway, so that's the case that we'll be exploring together in the group. And then that's my new book, which is titled Beneath a Blood Red Sky, is based on this case.
Wow. So how does it come together, I guess, as far as the collaboration part?
So, and this is the first time I've ever done this part of it. I have in the past have had various helpers with research, and of course with my editor and my wife and some of my beta readers, I will discuss aspects of a case and I'll ask them questions and get their thoughts and comments. I think one of my most important books that I've written is called Bloodshed, and it's about a school shooting. And there again, when it comes to true crime, I was greatly inspired by what happened at Columbine, and then how that actually became the blueprint for so many other school shootings, through the years. And with that, I was constantly not only doing all the research, but I was constantly asking my editor and my closest readers their take on different things, whether it's characters or aspects of the case. So in this time, any reader who wants to join this group, we're going to do that together. And so what I'll do is post a video or a podcast and questions, and then we will discuss it back and forth, and hopefully as a group come up with new theories and ideas, and really, because we'll look at the evidence, the physical evidence, we'll look at the witness statements, we'll look at every aspect of the case, the forensics, and then come up with theories and let those theories face scrutiny, the scrutiny of the group, and say, hey, I think this, I believe this, what about that? And that sort of relates to something I was mentioning earlier when it comes to some of the disrespect that is shown in the true crime community. I think for some, and hopefully these are the rare few, but for some, what seems to be missing more than anything else is a sense of humility that says, this is just my theory, and I'm basing it on, and hopefully it is based on some facts and some evidence, but to have the humility to say, I could be completely wrong about this. This is just one theory, and I should be willing to discuss this theory with you respectfully and get your feedback and back and forth. And to me, that's how the citizen detective is going to solve more and more cases, when we're not going off on wild tangents and willing to, rip someone to shreds because their theory is different from ours, but that we can really exchange information and do it with the humility that says, I could be absolutely wrong. That's why I'm submitting this theory to your feedback.
Yeah, it's crazy. I didn't expect we would be talking about this, but I'm glad we are. What is it about this? You said they should have the humility to respect the other person's theory. Is it like completely ego driven? And the reason why I ask this is because these battles are displayed on social media for the public. I mean, these could be things that could easily be done privately via email or a phone call, or they could schedule a like a Zoom meetup every Sunday and talk about the case and really work it out. But these are going on like for the public to see, and it doesn't make much sense for somebody to be going off on their theory and naming names. I mean, what if they're right? What if they're right and they're exactly, naming names? They've just blown it. They, like someone could be alerted to this, and that's just not on their head, not in their heads at all. The ego is crazy to me.
I absolutely agree, and I think everything has a shadow, right? And every strength is also a weakness, and vice versa. And so, if you say that someone's obsession with a case, shows a care and concern and an interest, the shadow side of that could be they feel ownership or an entitlement that says, this is now mine, and so my theory about this is all that matters. And I think we do see a lot of obsession, and I mean like true psychological obsession, not just I said I was obsessed with the JonBenet Ramsey case earlier. I don't mean it in the same sense. I find it interesting, and I've investigated it since it happened. I happen to have a daughter who's her same age, and when I was writing my first novel is when this case happened. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is if you look at social media and what people do online, look at it in the realm of religion, look at it in the realm of politics, true crime is no different. And so, and I think there's a hiding, I'm in my own little room and I'm firing off at you through my computer. You're not really there. So there's distance. And I think with a tool like the internet, we see the best and worst of humanity. And I feel like in the true crime community, those who are doing the kind of things we're talking about are the vast minority. I think they really are. But as often is the case, the most radical are usually the most vocal. They usually get the most attention. And so I don't think they are a good sample of humanity. But I think the lack of humility, and again, put it in any realm, put it in the realm of religion or of politics or of, psychology or whatever it happens to be, true crime. If we're confident, we're not fearful, then I'm willing to submit my theory to scrutiny, to have your feedback. And it's not going to devastate me if you disagree. And I'm not going to feel the need to attack you because you disagree. And if you begin to attack, then hopefully I'd be in a good place to see where that's coming from and not just automatically fire right back and do the same thing. But it's a complex issue, but I do believe we're talking about a very small percentage of all those who consume true crime.
Yeah, I think that's fair. That's pretty much, I think, what we've come across too in our experiences with those kind of arguments.
And I agree the ego's involved. And I'll say just this one other thing. I think there's some attention seeking, and I think there's a certain type of personality, certain types of on the spectrum of narcissism, that the more attention gained is just like feeding the beast. And so of course it just perpetuates whereas if it was not engaged with, if it was ignored, if it was, say, hey, I'm going to respond respectfully to people who are talking respectfully, and we're actually on a mission to be helpful as citizen detectives in this case, then we won't get, we always ask the question, is this getting us closer to finding out what happened to Maura or what happened to JonBenet or whoever it happens to be? Or is it just me entertaining myself and fighting with you about stuff that really is tangential to the actual case?
Totally.
So then what do you think happened to Maura Murray?
Right. I was just going to ask that. So you've done a lot of research into Maura's case and Brianna Maitland's case, but It's Maura's case that we're talking about today. What's your theory?
Well, I don't have a single set theory, and I'm definitely open to
Come
everything.
on, man.
I'm really going to give
just
you
kidding.
I'm
just trying to be that passionate online person.
I think that if you talk to any great detective, fictional, as I deal with, or in real life, maintaining a certain openness and following facts, and there's nothing wrong with a theory until that theory is proven wrong, and then you have to come up with another one. It's the scientific method, right? I'm going to say, this is my hypothesis. I'm going to test it. If that's not it, then I'm going to go to the next thing. If my ego is attached to that theory, then I have to defend it and fight it, and I have to sort of contort facts to prove that it's correct. So I will say that I remain open. I also say that when it comes to unsolved mysteries like this one, and this is one of the most mysterious unsolved mysteries there is. And we have, of course, several mysteries within the larger mystery. And we could go through each one of those. And the danger is with an unsolved mystery, especially one going on this long, and when there's mysteries inside of the mystery, is when we don't know something, it's really tempting to fill that void with, we want to know. Our minds are, for the most part, are not comfortable with ambiguity. And so we want to feel it. So we want to say, hey, it's got to be this or it's got to be that. And that's how the wild theories happen. So I think we need to look at what is possible and what is likely. And when I start by saying what is possible, because it's still open, because we've not found Maura Murray, alive or dead, then of course it does lead to speculation, but it also means that even some of the wildest theories, it's really hard to say that's absolutely not possible. It's not the case because we don't know. But I do think there's things that are far more likely than others. So when it comes to that, when it comes to actually what is likely, I would say the two most likely occurrences really start the same way. And I believe, and again, I could be completely wrong, it's just my theory, but I believe she left the vehicle. I believe based on the dog's scent where they followed, that she went a ways on her own, whether it's walking or running. And then it's at that point that what happened occurred. And I think the two most likely things are that she did go into the woods or somehow succumb to the elements. And especially if you say, and this actually leads to both of my theories, if she was at all inebriated or influenced at all with any kind of substance, and she'd just been in a wreck, so she's dazed, maybe confused, whatever the case. I've been in just a few accidents, not life-threatening, but it was enough to shake me up. And I know your system goes into shock, and so a lot of things are happening that way. So perhaps she did go somewhere and was not able to get up and was not able to, maybe she was more injured than we realized, or just the cold, whatever it was. The other thing, and I think is probably more likely, but it really depends on how detailed, how effective the searches have been. And I think you guys know a lot more about that than I do. But if the searches have been what they should be, then it means it's less and less likely that her body is out there to be discovered from the elements or whatever. So I think if she walked or ran for a certain distance, then I think it's likely that someone picked her up, that she was willing. And I think that's the most likely scenario, that she was willing to take a ride, perhaps wanting to get away from the scene, perhaps wanting, like so often is the case, if alcohol was involved at all, wanting to come back later, being upset, whatever the case may be. Because of that, I think it's far more either the person she went away with, something accidentally happened, and so then there's the cover up, the hiding of perhaps her body if something like that happened, or it was an opportunistic killer, not a so-called serial killer that's out there hunting for a victim, but that whoever she got in and I don't think it was someone she knew. I don't subscribe to the tandem. I don't think she was with someone else that picked her up. I do believe it was a stranger, and that whatever happened, intentional killing or accidental, that's the most likely case. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, love the way you broke it down.
Yeah, me too. And you made a lot of great points. And we don't know either, and I won't make the same joke before as jumping down your throat.
But Julie Murray has said that somebody knows something. That's not just an arbitrary thing to say. Somebody does know something we don't know, but someone knows. And with all of the pressure, all of the talk, all of the awareness, the podcast, the community, your book, even starting the solving a mystery with Michael Lister, it just energizes a community. It keeps people talking. Even if it's not talking about Maura's case, they'll eventually come back around to Maura's case again. And
right.
And it just keeps the energy going. And you're right, the detractors are just a very small, loud minority. So that's just something that comes with the territory, I guess.
And I just shared with you what I believe is most likely. But as I said before, it is possible that the wildest theory we've heard is the correct one. I mean, it until we know for sure. Now, again, I do think it's important to say, what's the evidence you're basing that on? Can you really say this is even possible given everything we know? And if that's the case, then let's explore it. But if it strange credulity, if it's so far out there, and again, not just so far out there, but there's no evidence for that theory, then I think our time is better spent on other more likely scenarios. The thing about law enforcement that I found I have a really close friend of mine is the sheriff in the county where I live. And he has become one of my primary consultants and helps me with every single book I write. And I should also say that in my novels, I really try to take a very realistic approach to crime itself, to the investigation, to the solving of the crime. And like I said, I want it to be a surprise. And I feel like several of my novels, based on reviews and what readers tell me, the ends are actually shocking. But yet they don't say, oh, but it doesn't make sense, or that I can't buy it, or I don't believe it. Again, I want it to be inevitable and yet surprising. And part of that is following how law enforcement works and asking questions. I have so many consultants. But the thing about most law enforcement, especially in I live in a rural area where Moreland went missing, is a very rural area, a small police department. Most crimes that happen, even violent crimes, it's obvious who did it. It is obvious. It's only in these cases where it is not obvious, or your obvious suspect, a family member, like say in the JonBenet Ramsey case, it turns out not to be the case, or that so many mistakes were made early on in the investigation, and which happened in both of these cases, that the investigation is so flawed that it's really very difficult for law enforcement to get a handle on it. But when it's obvious, law enforcement's good. They go with statistics. They go with who's most likely. It's obvious. This is not a whodunit. This is who did it, and we can solve it. We can build our case for the district attorney to take it to court. When it's a true whodunit, it becomes very, very difficult. And you would have to be, I think, a very seasoned detective to be able to approach a case like this successfully. Lou Holtz comes to mind going back to the JonBenet Ramsey case. I feel like he brought that, and he had solved over 100 homicides or maybe far more. I can't remember, but his approach was someone who was a detective and seasoned, but also open and could explore a whodunit in a way that your typical deputy or even sheriff's department and police department investigator never encounters. They never encounter a case like that. So they're not prepared, especially in a small area.
What kind of questions do you ask your you said it was a sheriff of the county that you live in as your good friend? What kind of questions do you ask him when you're approaching a new mystery, a new fictional mystery?
Well, I ask him absolutely everything. And even when I think I know the answer, I still ask him again. And it's interesting because not only every time will he give me, more and more information, but he'll refer to different cases he's worked. And he just draws from Florida statutes and the way the law works and just every bit of it and how he runs his department. As I said, for the last 10 or 12 books, John has been a sheriff's investigator. So he actually is working for a department like my friend manages. My friend's name is Mike Harrison, and we went to school together. We're in the same class. So we grew up together our whole lives. And when he became, in fact, he started consulting with me before he was a sheriff. He was an investigator. And so he's been doing this for me for a very long time. But I ask him issues related to jurisdiction. Like in the case I'm studying now, when a body is discovered in a body of water, who has jurisdiction? And sometimes in the case of the one I'm working on, the county lines are divided almost right in the center of the river. So someone could be murdered on one bank in one county. The body floats over to the other bank and it's in a different county. Who has jurisdiction? Who's going to run and so he answers questions like that. procedural questions, or just anything I have, and it's so extremely helpful. I have a forensics specialist that answers questions, and then it's certain specific cases are going to require certain, knowledge and specific questions I'll have that, I can do internet research, and I research books and everything else, but there's nothing like talking to an expert and all the experience they bring. And so that's what I try to do with each book, is to get as much of that as I can and let that inform the novel. And if you think about, and this, I'm sorry for the cliche, but if you think about an iceberg and what little bit you see in the novel, you're seeing the small part. But beneath that, all this research I've done, all the information I've gotten, it never makes it into the novel. And yet in a way it does, because it informs everything. And it gives to me, a credibility and a believability to this fictitious story.
Yeah, totally. Have you ever run by elements of Mora's Case to any of your consultants?
I have. It's a discussion I have with a lot of different people. I don't think. Well, actually, yes. When I was actually working on Cold Blood, my novel that's inspired by this case, I asked all of my experts, all my consultants, all of my people, all kinds of questions about it. And in some cases, I'm trying to think back, but I think in some cases I would ask them questions without identifying the case, without saying specifically, this is inspired by the Maura Murray case. And so these are the questions I have. And so I didn't really get like their theories about this particular case, but I shared with them elements of it and, got certain feedback. So it was more not an overall of the case, but specific elements related to it.
Following Mora's Case, you're obviously familiar with James Renner, and he's a writer as well. Have you read his book about the case, True Crime Addict?
I have. In fact, when I first read that article and started listening, getting interested in all, his was one of the first books I read about the case, and then just reread it recently. And so I would say that he is a fantastic writer. He is a really, really fine writer. And there's so many elements of his book that I just thoroughly enjoyed and have been inspired by, and really, obviously I differ from him in certain theories and where he goes and certain conclusions he draws, but that's fine. I mean, that's all good. I trust his research, and I really applaud his writing and his storytelling. I think it's interesting that as I reread the book, I thought this even more. You look at the title of the book. In one way, you could say this book is not about Maura Murray or her case. It's about James Renner. And he actually says that, I'm the true crime addict, right? And I'm telling you how I lost myself in this case. When Serial started, the journalist said, hey, I've never done this before, but I'm actually going to insert myself into this case, and you're going to hear my takes. And, when that happens, like I said earlier, it often becomes more about the person and what they're projecting onto what they're seeing than what's actually there. The best journalists, the best investigators, I think, keep a distance, and there's not so much projection. But anyway, taking that, I do think the book is, largely about him and his journey, which I find very fascinating. And again, he is an excellent writer, researcher, reporter. I really like all those aspects a lot.
Well, very good. We'll let him know that you said that, so he won't sick the dogs after you. Just kidding. No, that's pretty much it that I have, except you had mentioned in one of the correspondences about possibly doing a book giveaway or a donation. Did you want to talk about that during this interview? Sure,
would love to. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, anyone who's interested in participating in this Solve a Mystery group, or if they would like to check out the true crime fiction bundle I mentioned, the 6 novels that are based on true crime cases that have my introductions about them, anybody who does that, I'm going to donate half of the proceeds. So half of everything I bring in is going to go to the GoFundMe that Julie set up for Maura Murray for the case. So it's all the information's on my website, and if anybody has any questions, they can contact me through that. But it's just michaellister.com, and you can sign up for the group there. You can purchase the books or whatever, and then you feel free to drop me an email to make sure that I know that this is how you came to this, and if you have any questions for me. But in the very near future, after this, whenever this airs and whatever people decide to be a part of this, then we will be hopefully making a sizable contribution to this Maura Murray GoFundMe.
That's great. Thank you so much. How cool. So definitely check out michaellister.com and get your copy, sign up. Also get your copy of Cold Blood, but you can sign up for Solve a True Crime Mystery with Michael Lister.